Waitaku Ranges, and I now live in Alexandra in Central Otago, which is the place my children are from. For Alex Crosby toku ingoa, e kaupapa here me te kaiahi ngā taki aho ki te kaunihera arohi o Otako. My name is Alex Crosby, and I'm speaking to as Policy and Strategy Lead to the Central Otago District Council. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou koutou.
Lovely.
Tēnā rā tātou. Kei Nyuhiku tiku aki aho. Kei Atako e noho a ana aho. Ko mata o te awa e mahia nei aku mahanahara. Ko Maria Burnett tuku ingoe, he parks planner tuku mahi. Tēnā koutou. Hello to you all. Southland is where I grew up. I live in Otago now. The Mauta'o is the river that alleviates my worries. That's where I go for a run when Infra Council's loading slowly. And my name is Maria Burnett. Parks planning is my work. Virgin Seaworld.
We felt it was appropriate to introduce ourselves in Matsuri and English, given the subject matter we're discussing today, which is the dual naming provisions in the open spaces naming policy. That policy came into effect in early 2024. A soft review was undertaken and came to the February 2025 council meeting. At that meeting, Councillor McKinlay asked about the flexibility in dual naming. Deputy Mayor Gillespie noted the importance of understanding how the policy is practically applied, given its influence on other naming decisions. And Councillor McDonald mentioned how new our partnership with Mana Whenua is, and that this understanding is still growing. This workshop was called as a result of that discussion to provide some answers to those questions, a bit of the context, talk a little bit about the taonga, and then look at the policy clauses themselves and how they're practically applied. And that brings us to the end of slide 1. As for context and for background, we obviously have the original partnership protocol of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. We have the Ngāi Tahu Claims Settlement Act of 1998 and the Waitangi Tribunal findings that surround it that give us a lot of context and guidance on the practical application in the region. But most importantly, we have the partnership protocol between yourselves and Ōkaha as representatives of the Rūnaka from Ngāi Tahu, setting the leading terms of our relationship. And we are about to embark on the 4th iteration of that protocol. And then at the bottom is context. We also have Kahuru Mana Ngāi Tahu, which is the Atlas mapping project that Maria will give a lot more detail on in a later slide.
So to underpin the concept of place, we wanted to show you the base structure of a pika, which is the traditional Māori way of introducing oneself, which we did earlier. So you can see at the top there, you've got Moa and then Awa, so mountain, river or sea, and then down the bottom, Aho, that's yourself. So you often hear about someone's land and the land that they identify with before you hear their name. It reflects a deep connection to place, to taonga, like mountains, rivers and regions, and how that shapes identity.
So taonga is probably a word that some of you are already familiar with. It features really heavily in Article 2 of the treaty. It directly translates to treasures, but like most translations, it's quite clumsy and leaves quite a bit out. So taonga are treasures of deep cultural, spiritual and historical value. They're connected to whakapapa or ancestry, which is the genealogical web that links people, place, ancestors in the natural world. And that's the story that's told in everything. And taonga can be tangible like this pōnano, or in the next slide you can see aspects of the natural world. It's really reflecting the bond between people and place and that custodianship as opposed to ownership. And then next slide. They can also be intangible too. And the best example, or the most relevant example, is probably the video Rebecca Williams showed you recently of Alicia Mackay talking about the difference between the public sector and the private sector and that intangible public good that we're trying to deliver. And that is the taonga. Those other taonga are Te Reo Māori, or the Māori language, the Tauranga Māori, which are the Māori knowledge systems, and names. And a lot of that knowledge system is encoded in the names. Māori have a duty of care or kaitiakitanga over this taonga to protect them for future generations. And in that legislative framework we have, where we engage with taonga, we're also participating in that guardianship.
So we wanted to have some local examples. So this is a Central Otago example of the taonga, a name of cultural significance. Omako, the legend is that Omako comes from 3 rocks that represents husband, wife, and child. It's a traditional name, not the gifted one, but still a taonga because of the meaning and history it carries.
Oturehua is a particularly beautiful example of taonga. It began as a traditional name of a gifted one, and it means the place where the summer star stands still. You can see the breakdown there. It's or the place of to stand, rehua, which is the summer star in Chinese. It was actually called Rough Ridge in the 1800s, but locals preferred the Māori name and the story behind it, so they changed it in 1908.
Look, and I think this one is actually quite interesting, isn't it? Because you see how topical Māori names are, te reo names are right now. And in 1908, there was a brave community that, when you literally take that translation, I thought that was more appropriate. I'm not sure what the discussion was at that time, but now when we think back and think of the poet Turner's poems that he crafted in this place and looking up at the stars, and if this is a non-event, that people would look at Aotearoa and go, that is the right name for the right place, because it had significance.
So when Turnbull Thompson surveyed the Minnetonka, he put Maori names in all the names, and he was a Scotsman. And the English Minister of Lands was in Wellington and wrote to him and said, give me names of places I can spell and understand. And then he changed it to English speaking. So they're all of them were named in those
And
names.
Thompson was so annoyed at that director coming to his boss.
Yeah.
That he went back and called everything.
Big Burn, Sour Burn, Hog Burn, Weatherburn. Yeah, he changed the names halfway through that talk in the Minnetonka.
Yeah, and because he was just doing this.
Yeah, because they did the English and the Scottish never got on.
A talk, so he just gave him response back.
Yeah, that was 116 years ago. So
He's still with around anyway.
On council.
Yeah.
So gifted names are a little bit different than those traditional place names. They're also a taonga, but they're a taonga that is gifted from an iwi to the wider community. They're not direct translations, but they do carry stories, history, and that meaning whakapapa within it as well. Yeah, they have whakapapa, Matauranga Māori, and Wairoa, which is their language of genealogy, Māori knowledge, and then their spiritual essence or life force of the place. To be gifted a name with that that level of gravitas is a really huge honour, and it's not just given anywhere. We must show ourselves as being capable of kaitiakitanga or caring for that name and that language as the taonga it is, and demonstrate our understanding of the mind attached to it. And the two we've got up there, because we were quite low on examples that were local, examples from Maria and I's professional backgrounds actually. So mine is Te Taru Ki Tāwhi, which was Auckland's climate plan, and I felt really honoured to work on this one when that name was gifted. The name Te Taru Ki Tāwhi comes from Tāwhiri Mātia, who's the primary ancestor associated with weather. And the gifting of that name to us was reflecting that we'd gone from a human-centred approach to the environment to an ecologically centred approach, and it carried a huge amount of mana and weight.
okay, and in my example, so Te Paia Oranga, that means the pursuit of well-being, and is the other name for recreation Aotearoa. So it was gifted by Te Kahuri, Te Kahuri Kura Aori, as part of the recreation Aotearoa strategy process. I wasn't on the board at the time, but now that I am, I can see the depth of that gesture, and a name like that isn't given lightly. It reflects trust that the sector can care for the taonga and carry the mana behind that name. And another thing that I have observed is that actually both of those names are used interchangeably. And when I talk about recreation Aotearoa, I sometimes use both, and it depends on the context and about, I guess, your level of comfort with that name as well.
And a new park or facility might receive a Māori name gifted by mana whenua from iwi to the wider community, and that would usually be signalled quite early on in the process. Next one. So we tried to reflect this whole background, the role of Kauranga in the open spaces naming policy through these three clauses, the engagement with Mana Whenua, the Te Reo Māori names, and the dual naming clause at the bottom. And the particular clause we were asked to talk through with you today is that very bottom one there. When dual naming is used for open spaces, the Te Reo Māori name will be positioned before the English name.
See David Seymour.
Okay, so this is the only council park in Central Otago that currently has a dual name, Paimoana Haihai Riverside Park. It was adopted by the Vincent Community Board, and Kaimoana Haihai means the split seas, so the traditional Kaitaki name for the confluence of the Mata'o and Manuhirakia rivers, which we mentioned both of those rivers earlier. It's not a translation of Riverside Park, it's a return to ancestral naming that embeds local stories into place. There are actually two other Riverside Parks in Wanaka, so this name also gives this space a clear point of difference and helps with that unique element. And over on the right hand side, you can see the snippet of Ka Huru Manu, and that confirms Kaimoana Haihai is the traditional name for this site. So we're going to explore that in a little bit more detail with this video on the next slide.
It's a short one, it's about a minute and a half.
Nothing just quite tighter. It'll be stepping it.
For showing the authority.
Under force item.
Probably.
Yeah, I'll keep talking while we try anyway. So, okay, so the Ka Huru Manu, the Nine Tahu Atlas, it records over 1,000 traditional Māori place names across Te Waipunanga, the South Island. So just as names aren't given at random, names also can't be entered into the atlas at random. Each name has to be supported by at least 3 sources, such as oral histories, Māori land court records, early maps, and manuscripts. So it's a really robust and trusted reference, and it's now really widely used by planners and councils. I'll let them explain the rest.
That's that.
If you just drag the little red dot, that's it stuff.
So it's a bit quiet, so yeah, maybe what we'll do is we can circulate it to everyone anyway, but yeah, also.
There is him explaining the concept and the meaning of the names, and then they gathered a large amount of the community at Puketeraki Marae down in Karatani to work together on part of this Ka Huru Manu mapping project, and we'll send it out separately.
One thing too, when you look at that, you'll notice that in Central Otago, many of the names recorded in the atlas are already in curricular use actually. So what we find in the park space is that regardless of what's on the sign, the community will use the name which holds the most meaning to them. It tells the story of the place best. In Aotearoa, parks and open spaces are not just public assets, but places filled with whakapapa and stories and identity.
Don't worry too much about digesting this entire table. We just really like to show our workings that when we were considering where dual naming could come from, we cast a really wide net and looked at all the circumstances that might apply. And then we had AI help us to figure out the likelihood of it applying in the region and the level of influence that we as a council would have. Anywhere we put an asterisk just denotes that we adjusted what the AI told us, such as the restatement of the traditional Māori name. We thought, given that most of the ones on the atlas are unused and we have the treaty settlement there, it had a lower likelihood of coming in. And then some of the others we just tweaked a little to better reflect our community too. But what we'll do on the next, we can circulate that, and on the next slide we'll just go into the most relevant or pertinent categories, which are the two we've spent most of us talking about: the gifted Māori name or the reinstatement of a traditional Māori place name. There's also the translation of an English word or name, which has the potential for dual naming. That's less culturally grounded. You're more likely to see that in somewhere like putting whare puka next to the word library. We've got commemorative naming, which is where there's a shared history. The best example of that we could think of was Whakaari, which is White Island, known in colonial history as the island that was white, or in Māori history as the dramatic volcano that liked to visibly show off a lot. We've got community, tourism or cultural initiatives and cultural revitalisation projects. That was a category from the previous slide, which is really relevant to a lot of our regional identity work. And then the policy itself allows for places where mana whenua would prefer a dual naming arrangement. So we've separated that out there. Now, if we look forward into our brief from the workshop, this is really where we have options. So it may be that we've given you the background today and the understanding and you're happy with the policy as is. If there is still a request to look for flexibility, we could take a chart like this to Ōkaha and start a conversation with them. But it is our staff advice that we separate out gifted and reinstated names in the chart as to our first, just to reflect that we have that understanding that these categories are particular common. And after that, if Sarah pushes the button once more, it will politely ask if you have any questions. So back to the worship to run that.
Well done. I think there might be some quite strong views on the table, and I'd like to. We've asked for this to come back a couple of times, because I think there is a bit of an elephant in the room, and whether you would like to ask questions about that first or ask questions about the policy as it currently sits, or comments. Anybody want to?
It would be good to see the proposed policy wording that we've seen at the meeting. And then I'd like to sort of see how, say, taking that, no change or a change.
Just in those slides that will be the one with the 3 pictures in a row.
That's one. Yep.
So we haven't actually captured a lot in there. It's very, very basic, but that's what we can work with.
This doesn't mean we're going to be rushing out or finding a name for Pioneer Park or Molyneux Stadium, for example. Doesn't. No. So it really is the impact going to be on, I imagine, the new Cromwell Hall will seek a gift of from Ngāi Tahu, the name for that.
Or not.
Well,
Or not.
that's the discussion.
That's the discussion.
Because if we ask for a name,
Yeah.
and I think it's right, if we ask for mana whenua to gift a name for something, then I think we're inviting them to put their name first.
Yes.
But there are some instances where we might not be asking for a name, or there might be instances where the current name it has carries a huge weight, i.e. a memorial hall. I think it's a bit different in, asking for a new name for a memorial hall as opposed to Molyneux Stadium. might like a new name, it doesn't carry any significance.
it's
Whereas
not
anything
Margaret,
that has a
yeah.
memorial attached to it, I think is different. And I think that is what we were looking for in the open spaces naming policy, recognising that the hall is not necessarily considered an open space, but that there will be situations whereby we might not ask for a te reo name, recognising that there is another name that carries a significance and a weight. And we don't want mana whenua to feel, I guess, offended that we not ask for something, but in places like Samoa and Hi, I think that is appropriate.
Can I just ask one question? If you don't ask for a name and you're offered a name and given a name, does it then have to go first? It depends on our policy, and again, back into tikanga. So strictly in tikanga, if we were to adopt the approach and to see it as a gift of money, we would probably want it to go first, but we would have scope to decide. And even the Ngāi claim the subject in name things quite often does have the English name first. So there is some scope to move, but when we start to get into those gifted names, just with that lineal history underneath it, we might want to choose to put them first anyway, and they're back to you guys. But if we didn't ask for it, and they just offered it to us, would they be offended if it actually went second? Sure.
Yeah. Have you got an example of where they've just offered here for this?
So that they not just give you a name if you don't ask for one?
That would
I
be
don't know.
Yeah.
But wouldn't see that as happening. What Rebecca said to me when I sat down with her is that in practice, she has found that the name that goes first doesn't really matter as much because the community pick up the one that works for them. So she said there was quite a stoush over the Toitu Museum at the time. It was on the paper and people worried which one comes first. And over time, everybody just felt like Toitu was easier to say. So now Toitu is what it's known as. So I think that the iwi we have here, although I couldn't speak for them because I'm fucking up in North Island, we're very likely to just practically say, let's get on with it and let us figure it out. But it's a conversation we could have with some people like us.
From my experience in the North Island, here, Lower North Island, they wouldn't offer a name. They would, if you would ask them, Te Atiawa Ngāti Toa, they would then do the research and come back to you with a name, and so you've seen that Tākina, the convention centre and all that in Wellington City, that's as a result of Okiahu, the memorial here, that's specifically as a result of government working with mana whenua and specifically asking for a name, but they wouldn't offer one because it only if you asked.
It's fair.
And from the workshop that we had for the Memorial Hall specifically, I know Araha said that we did ask that, didn't we, if there was anything in the pipeline naming wise, and she said they'd done a really high level over it and nothing significant stood out, so there wasn't anything. At what point are we trying to make something fit to name it, make it significant, and then it's going first, or are we giving something a name to have that dual name and respect? Like, I think it's a good thing to have, but where's the balance in that in terms of the people that don't necessarily think that's appropriate? And we're saying, oh no, but it is because it's gifted or it's significant or it's whatever. If it isn't significant necessarily, but
Determining significance.
yeah, but is that, that's that question, how significant and whose decision is that? Like, is that offensive if we then say like, yeah, you've given us that, that's great, but our community feels like we want it to go second, not first? Is that offensive to do that in a gifted but not significant way? Like, where is that significance? Like, who?
Just go on with a page A.
Look, I think honestly, if you don't want a te reo name, then I would not ask for one.
Exactly.
I would not go to them for them to do it, because I think whatever you do, if you don't accept that name and it's not first,
Yeah, that's
and
what
the Ngāi Tahu Treaty Centre was one of the early ones, so it's Clutha Mata'o, but if you look at it now, it would have been Mata'o Clutha,
Yeah.
because they've progressed such a long way in terms of what's now the standard. So, it's better to avoid by not asking.
They did get some in the cinema at Aoraki Mount Cook.
That's right.
They did get some where
That's right.
and there's this whole schedule in the Act. And that's why you got for Lake Roxbury, you got Kamana Hei, and for Lake Dunstan, you got Te Wairere, and those special acknowledgement areas that are in 20 separate schedules. And some they did, some they didn't. I'm sure today, you're right, Peter, they would probably go to that extent.
And the application with the Riverside Park is a classic example of appropriate.
Yeah.
Because it's new, it's bicultural, it's significant, and like the Cromwell Memorial Hall should remain the Cromwell Memorial Hall. Because that is the mana totally associated with that.
The only problem that
we've asked.
what David alluded to last time was that if you want to get Taylor Swift, she's not going to come to the Cromwell Memorial Hall. At least you'd have to have an event
And she's not
Yeah.
gonna come
arts, culture and heritage.
It's not gonna come to a Maori name memorial.
No, but as a name, it doesn't sell what that venue is.
No,
It might be Cromwell Memorial or something else.
Yeah.
That's right.
yeah,
Not
exactly.
to complicate it too much further, but I was just down at Puketaraki Marae former Doors King. And they explained that a huge part of the history of particularly urban marae, where that came about was post-war, Māori were not allowed in RSAs, which when I fact checked that was more than North Island, but Māori were not allowed to go into the RSA halls. So as those marae were created, there's a whakatauki that roughly translates to we fought together, we died together, we should have a place to be together, which would tie really nicely into that place. You were to go through the local history. But like most things, I think these things are easier solved on a case-by-case basis with local people than they are for us to look at what's happening.
Because it shouldn't dictate.
So I think Alex has just got it in one, is that I think we've got to have flexibility so it's the right answer, the right course.
Yes.
And that to me is that's what got me about the dual naming. That last bit said, bang, that's going to be it. And you go, you've just lost all the flexibility that you might need for why the good reason is that you shouldn't do it. You have to go for divert from your policy, change it to do something that everybody says is the right thing to do. And I think also captures me is that the engagement Mana Whenua talks about, Mana Whenua may prefer or may not. And I think for the same reason is that which this wouldn't happen, but we might choose a name that could be offensive unintentionally or whatever. And I think the key thing going forward is to give ourselves the scope and the ability to get the right name for the right place. And Peter's right, Cromwell Memorial Hall is easy. It's what it's always been. Is that the Cromwell Memorial or something else? I don't know. But we need to have a conversation with our community and it's not just the Mana Whenua community, it is the community.
So while we very carefully weave through a complex minefield so well, one more concept to throw on the table is to take us back to that idea of partnership, and that the partnership protocol is giving some amount of decision making to our partner in this. So how much are we prepared to trust for the step we're in?
I don't think that we've actually, we have engaged quite, I think extensively. You can tell by the building and how their history, their beliefs are actually intertwined in all of these.
Yeah.
It is very, very old. It's integrated. It's integrated, if you know what I mean. You can really recognise that. So I don't think, well, this is just my opinion, I don't actually think, it's really obvious that they've been involved and engaged. I don't think that you could say that there hasn't been a recognised partnership. Yes.
Yeah, I'm leaving the whole to David, I mean, and as a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we come to sites of significance, do we want to still hold the pen and say we'll tick those off? Or do we want to let our partners say these are the sites of significance?
I don't see there's any legal or other justification on the autonomy. The autonomy of this governance group is total.
That's not what the UN says about totality, but that
I-
could be
you know,
how
But in law, that's what the situation is, and it's my belief that you impinge on the autonomy of this group to make decisions at your peril.
I guess the point of this was to give a bit of background where the policy lies, and we've got a bit of direction of, the level of using, and sort of flexibility of what that looks like, and then linked in with our partnership agreement. Is there anything else that you feel that you want any further conversation on, as our next step is to bring that policy back to this table to have it You know,
I guess coming from what we saw happen out in our corner, our community's probably not ready to go on the journey as much as the people on the journey. But the understanding all of it as much as we can, the real risk we run of is actually overusing the policy and not having the relevance what it does mean.
Yeah.
And that would be the, you know, it worries me that we feel, and maybe it's at this time, we feel that we've got to go there first because we've only just got a brand new relationship. We didn't have that relationship 7 years ago. But we still were in harmony with each other all the way through. And I guess the risk is that we overuse not so much the policy, but are Akaha happy, or do they feel that there's so much movement they've got to give names or whatever? Like it'd be gift and gift and gift, but it doesn't mean anything to them. Hopefully they'll say no.
I guess that's the challenge. It's not Okaha gifting the name.
No.
Our consultancy
Yeah.
branch is Mana Whenua, and then made
But that's
much more
where we
difficult
go
by
to
the fact
that.
that there are a number of different Runaka who travel through here, and that's, I guess,
Yeah.
the challenge that we have compared to some of the other areas around both the South Island, especially the North Island, where you've just got one hapu, or other places where you've got 7 and they all hate each other, which that can be challenging as well. I think we'd like to see the policy. It seems like broadly people are quite happy with this, but would like there to be the ability for exceptions to do what in some spaces. And
Generally meet the need, do you think, from that one we've got there, the Te Reo names will generally be positioned. That gives us the scope, because what is really positive, I think, is that we're able to have this conversation really openly and figure our way through it. So as these decisions come up one by one, our understanding will grow, we'll work more with Runaka, we'll understand that circumstance more. And in 1 to 3 years, when we review this policy, we'll have a better go on where we're at. But for now, we could just say the dual name is used, the Te Reo Māori name will generally be positioned. If there's another clause where we need another general word, we can pop that in, and then we can keep talking.
well, I think you can put generally, because as Cheryl's highlighted, we're not going to just be gifted a name out of the blue. We will have asked, and we will have asked for it for a reason.
Yeah.
And if we don't ask for one, we'll be, I'd imagine in some cases, it'll depend on what it is, but sometimes you'll be looking to say, we think gifting's appropriate. Would we even go so far as to suggest it could be this? We probably wouldn't.
No.
But equally, there might be other situations where you're not looking for gifting, you're looking for a jewel, and we might even go and say, well, we think from what you've taught us, it could be this name. I don't know. The key thing is to have the flexibility to reflect the situation that, as it may change and could change in the future. The reality is in Central Otago is that the vast majority of people will say, well, as equally as important as what Mana Whenua view is, so is the view of those that are here. And there will be people that will say that neither should have preference. And that's the bit I think we've got to keep ourselves open to be able to accommodate both sides of any conversation that happens about it. And that's the most important thing. It's about to recognise both and say, and then we get that easy decision to make, like we do with LTPs and all the other things, we'll make a final call. But don't have both arms up our back about what it's going to be, because a lot of people could get really peeved.
Peter, if you're offered a name and the council or the community board said, well, we're not happy with this name, how about this name? Would they be then offended by that, or would they?
I can only talk to my would not offer a name to council. That would only do a name if it was approached by council. And then they would do the research to come up with what they consider to be that appropriate name. Most of it might be because of its geography. What was it for? Or definitely linked to place. And
But it would be rude to then say to them, well, actually, we kind of come up with a different Maori name. How about this?
I don't think we can come together. And I also don't think you can go back and say, oh, no, we don't like that.
That's like me saying, Cheryl, I don't care that your name's Cheryl, but I'm going to call you Bill.
Actually, I probably prefer it.
All right, bad example. I'll call Martin Cheryl instead, all right?
I mean, if you go down the work that goes into that's what they gifted, and because of the relevance of it means to what it is. So,
Yeah, and that's quite an important point that we're talking about every gifting us a name, we're talking about gifting. to work there, not something that we would impose on us from outside. Like, that is an aspirational goal we could set ourselves and work to.
And just to round out really quickly, once policy's been in place, we've used it twice. One of them is Kamahaho, which we went and asked, and the second one was the Campbell's trap up in Cromwell. And Manapino came back to us and said it wasn't so significant, and they recommended Campbell's. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And that's what I'd expect will happen going forward. But again, to provide that flexibility, we say, well, it is kind of maybe for us, and you go, well, actually, you know, we might make the call, say, well, Campbell or some other equally iwi related name, we might say, they say that we don't have a preference. We can say, well, we can work it out.
And, you know, when it comes to things like, you know, the old man range, we know.
Yeah.
And the old is the same, so those, they already exist, it's not like we're running around trying to bring up new stuff.
yeah.
You can see from the list that there are very few traditional placements that aren't commonly used already.
Yeah.
So we've probably got the direction.
Thank you very much.
It's fine.
It's